What can we expect for the current crypto bull market? How long is it going to last? When is it going to peak? If you want to know what astrology can tell you about these questions, then this video is for you. Welcome, folks. This is Dr. V, and on this channel, you get the astrology straight up and unadulterated on everything from the cosmic level to the street level and everything in between, including financial markets and Bitcoin specifically, which is what we're going to look at in this video, where I'm going to give you a prognosis and some predictions on where the current bull market is going to. But before I do that, I'll first give you some understanding of the pattern recognition system that I'm using, the archetypal patterns that I'm seeing in the celestial cycles, and how they correlate and correspond to particular developments in the history of Bitcoin and crypto, because this background will help you first be able to read these signs yourself as well better. And secondly, it will help you understand where my prognosis and my prediction is coming from and what it's based on, which is why it's important that you watch it as well. But if you want to just go straight ahead to seeing what I have to say about the upcoming cycle, you can skip the theory and the history part, and you can just go right to the prognosis, which is going to be in the chapters, timestamps below as well for you to choose. All right, so the last thing to say before I get into it is obviously none of this is financial advice and blah, 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 blah. You know, the spiel, this is all for education and entertainment purposes to improve your own research and, you know, to give you some cool tools and cool insights to play with. So do your own research, but still, you know, what I'm saying is it's gonna happen exactly like this. You'll see. All right, so let's look at the charts. In astrology, we work with charts, and the most important chart, obviously, the Bitcoin Genesis chart for 2009, January 3rd, which is when Satoshi Nakamoto minted the first Bitcoin block. And for this chart, you can see right away that there is a Uranus-Saturn opposition, and you can see that there is a lot of stuff going on in Aquarius. Now, okay, Uranus obviously rules Aquarius, and this is important because in financial astrology, we work with rulership. So for instance, the gold commodity or asset is ruled by Leo and the Sun. Silver is ruled by Cancer and Moon. Real estate is ruled by Capricorn and Saturn. When it's commercial real estate or when it's residential real estate, it's going to be Cancer as well, and so on and so forth. Every commodity, every asset has a ruler, and that ruler tells you something about the general state of that asset. And Bitcoin and crypto is very clearly ruled by Uranus, right? It also makes sense. Uranus is the principle of rebellion and revolution on an ideal plane, which then comes and changes society through an idea. In some ways, you can say that Bitcoin, the whole idea of Bitcoin is that it's money backed by abstract mathematics alone. Now, be that as it may, when we look at the charts in order to see what's going to happen to Bitcoin, we need to pay special attention to Uranus. So what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to take away the outer planets. I'm just going to, the other way around. I'm going to take away the inner planets, the Mars, the Venus, and so on and so forth. And we're just going to focus on the outer planets, right? So kind of take away a little bit the distractions. You know, I'm not a day trader. I'm not so much interested in the day-to-day fluctuations. So I'm not going to look at the short-term planets. I'm only looking at the big shifts in the entire space. For those, you only need the outer planets. So what's really interesting here is that when we look at the history of Bitcoin, basically my observation is that every time you have something important happen in the space, it correlates with an aspect to Uranus, right? So Uranus is always involved. So in the beginning, you still have this opposition, obviously here with Saturn, right, which was there in the beginning of the whole Genesis as well. But then in 2010, you have the first other planet come into play, and that's Jupiter. So Jupiter comes into a conjunction, and this corresponds exactly, this phase when Jupiter comes in, it corresponds with the first large expansion of the Bitcoin and crypto space. So this is when you had a pizza day, right, which was in 2010, I think in July. You also had the launch of the first major exchanges, the first commercial transactions, so all of these kind of first wave of expansion which takes place in the space is under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, pretty much exactly, right, of that year. So this goes until when, right, until June, July, basically it's in action, right, and then it kind of leaves, and then you have the slow but steady emergence of a new constellation. Jupiter is still there for a while, right? But then, you have really, it starts to move away and you start to move into a new constellation with Pluto, right? And that's a long-term one. So you see Pluto is here, you see Pluto is here, and Pluto and Uranus were in a square for a really long time, 2011 to 2014, 15, really, it was just it kept going on and on. It was a really long transit where you really had a lot of shifts happening throughout that time. We're going to talk about that in a bit, when it gets more exact in our scale here. So then we move on, and then we're going to look for the next important aspect, which corresponds to a lot of breakdowns. But the first time it starts to come into play, the first time it starts to get a little bit exact with Uranus is here in summer of 2011. This is the first time, right? And around this time, you had the first major security breach into a central exchange for Bitcoin, Mt. Gox at that time, right? That corresponded with the first hit of Pluto square Uranus. Okay, then we go on and we're gonna move through 2012, where you just have more, of the same expansion and hacks and so on going on with that square still in place. And we get to 2013, where we have Jupiter coming back into the picture. Why? Because we're going to get here this T square. So Jupiter comes back into aspect with Uranus, right? Pluto is still there in that same square, but Jupiter joins the party, right? In 2013, starts to correlate again, starts to configure again with Uranus. And what happens? Jupiter obviously stands for expansion. Jupiter also at that time here with Saturn in a nice trine. And this time in 2013, you have the big expansion, first big push of the price action. And the price action moves from something around $200 at the beginning of the year to over $1,000 towards the end of the year, right? And this happens punctuated by a phase of expansion, technological expansion that you have, and adoption expansion that you have throughout the year, with Jupiter being in the picture, right? Jupiter being in the picture here with this T square. So you can see this here as well, where I've got it written down, the important events in the chronological development and how they correspond with Uranus constellations, particular Uranus constellations in 2013 under the Uranus square Pluto. We also still had the shutdown of Silk Road, which corresponds with the Uranus-Pluto image and the constellation that is marked by that particular archetypal signature. And then the next important thing is here in 2014, February, Mt. Gox declaring bankruptcy with a loss of 850,000 Bitcoins. That was 7% of all existing Bitcoins, which were lost at that time, which were embezzled, and this was a huge thing that happened in the space. So let's see what the signature is. And when we look at the chart, we're going to see that we have this ongoing constellation here, right, with the Jupiter and Pluto T-square. And then exactly in February, we're getting a hit from Saturn, right? Saturn comes in with a sesqui square, right, which is this aspect here to Uranus, right? And this exactly as this harsh aspect from Saturn hits, and remember, Saturn-Uranus is the most important relationship that we're looking at. That's the king maker, that's the game changer constellation in crypto, Saturn-Uranus, right? So, because it's all about the struggle between Saturn and Uranus. So every time they're constellated, we should see big things happening in the crypto space. And I'm going to show you that that's actually has always consistently been the case. So in 2014, again, to come back to this, right, we had the T-square here, and then with Saturn coming into the play, exactly when Saturn joins the party is when we have the Mt. Gox bankruptcy, which was a huge story. Many, many years it took the crypto space to even recover from that. Even to this day, the prices are not where they could be if it wasn't for this calamity that happened in that time. And shortly after, still under this constellation, the IRS declares crypto or Bitcoin specifically as a taxable property. So this is a next step in the battle between the established structures and the innovative ideas and technologies that are there to change the world, right? And this falls also under this signature. So let's move on. What's the next thing that we're going to look at? This aspect, as I just showed you, perfectly corresponds with the developments that we see in 2014. And then here we go. Here's the next aspect, right? You see, pay attention here. You see, we move and bang. Here's the next aspect. The next aspect is a trine of Jupiter that comes into action in 2014 here. And this trine, it is a long-term thing because Jupiter goes back here. You see, goes back. And then after retrograde motion is again in perfect trine with Uranus for large parts of 2015. So 2014 and 2015, we should see some big technological advancements, right? Whenever Jupiter hits Uranus, we should see some expansions, technological expansions, right? And what happens here under this trine, exactly under this trine, when it's pretty much exact, you've got the launch of Ethereum, right? So Ethereum, the Ethereum crowdfunding campaign launches in June 2015 under the exact Jupiter-Uranus trine. And a bit later in the year, Ethereum goes live. And this is obviously a huge development for the crypto space because now you have smart contracts and all the rest of it, all the applications, the dApps and so on and so forth, and everything else that was built later in terms of applications and infrastructures and so on. So this is a perfect correspondence of the aspect. And again, we can see the key pivotal role that aspects to Uranus play in the history, the development of Bitcoin and the crypto space. Okay, so let's move on and let's see what happens next in the story. And when we move on, we see here that in 2016, we first have a Uranus-Saturn trine in the beginning of the year, and I have a lot of consolidation and the first applications built on Ethereum, like DAOs, and the first DAO is built in this time. A lot of initial regulations are passed in various countries, a lot of consolidation we have around the space. And then later in the year, we get again here the sesqui square, the hard aspect from Saturn. In July, we get this hard aspect from Saturn on Uranus. And this is exactly when we have the DAO hack. Right? So the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which was built on Ethereum, it was hacked and a lot of the funds were taken away, by basically exploiting a loophole in the system. And this was a huge crisis. There was a huge debate around it afterward, what to do. And then there was the hard fork of Ethereum, which now is Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. There's a very interesting story if you look into it. And this was a big crisis for the space. And again, it happened under a hard aspect from Saturn on Uranus. I'm going to speed up here a little bit so that we get to the, closer to the present. But again, this pattern continues in 2017 when this trine comes back, the harmonious aspect with Saturn. That's when you have some massive, major growth. This is when the first ICOs are starting and the whole ICO craze of 2017. This happens all under this aspect of the trine between Saturn and Uranus that you can see here again, right? Which stands for like an easy and smooth flow into the established structure. So a lot of new capital comes into the space in this time, which perfectly corresponds with Saturn trine Uranus, right? And you can see this goes on until the end of the year, November, December, when you had the big peak, right? This was to 2017. Bitcoin was around $20,000 here for the first time, and this is exactly when this trine ends, right? The trine ends and it's over basically, right? And that year of establishing a lot of new ground, getting a lot of new capital in, which is all perfectly encapsulated by Saturn trine Uranus, it comes to an end. And then we go into 2018. Again, as I said, I'm going to be a bit faster here to get closer to the present and then to look into the future as well, because if you understand the past, if you understand the patterns as they have played out in the past, you'll be able to anticipate the future. So let's continue and we'll look at the next few things that are happening in 2018. We still have, this trine coming back for a last couple of hits, but it's basically already outlived its purpose. It's done its thing. It doesn't bring anything new to the picture anymore. But what is new is that Uranus is now in Taurus in early 2019, which is really important because Taurus is the sign that rules money, currency, right? Which is why, this current bull run that we're in right now and the previous one, they were all under Uranus in Taurus. They're so important for adoption and for establishing Bitcoin and crypto as a serious alternative in digital assets, as a serious asset class that a lot of investors globally are now looking at, right? So, but what happens next in the development is that only once Uranus gets some major aspects here, we have some more action. So in 2019, there isn't that much. You see, Uranus is kind of unaspected for most of 2019, and we just had some recovery, right? And coming out of crypto winter and getting back on our feet, with Jupiter aspecting here towards the end of 2019, right? And this is pretty nice, right? So this sets up a nice recovery, right? Which is underway here, and people are coming back, and people are getting back into the game. And then we have in 2020, we have again some major aspects, right? So here we had this, harsh kind of constellation here, the COVID constellation, right? For 2020, kind of the big breakdown of all systems, right? Which was here very clearly to read for anybody who knows how to read this. I predicted this, years before I predicted the great breakdown of the global economy in 2020. This is on video. This is in emails. I have this. At some point, I'm going to publish them. 5 years before it happened, I predicted it for 2020. But be that as it may, in 2020, this goes through, and then we have a aspect forming towards Uranus, which is important. And this is here. We have Jupiter and Saturn both at the same time aspecting Uranus, right? So we're going to have some breakdowns and some crackdowns and some massive expansion. And this is what happened. We had Tesla accepting BTC as a currency early in 21, and we had the crackdown of China on miners and the start of the next bull run. All of this started with this constellation in early 2021, and then it goes on throughout the year where this aspect for Saturn to Uranus, it is exact here for the first leg of the 2021 bull run. You see his aspect is exact here. You see in April, and then it just stays in aspect still for a little bit. It goes out of aspect here for the summer of 21. It goes out of aspect for the summer, right? So we have a little breather. We have a little break here where it's not in aspect. And then it comes back into aspect here at the end of the year, right? November, October, November, it comes back into aspect, which is when we had the second leg, the second peak of the bull run, right? So even though this is a square, so a harsh aspect, right? Still, we can see Saturn to Uranus is the key defining constellation that really is the main marker for the major development of the crypto and Bitcoin market. And even when there's a harsh aspect, we have immense growth potentially, right? Because a square is not necessarily, a square is just challenging growth. Square means challenging growth, right? A moment of challenging growth that comes through the confrontation. And here in mundane and financial, it perfectly corresponds with both the first and the second leg of the bull run in 2021. Both of them were under pretty much exact Uranus-Saturn aspects, right? So when we continue this, and it goes out of aspect, and this is when we had this kind of realization that the bull run was over. People didn't really know. You know, it took us some time to realize, everybody who remembers that time, right? After a few months, it was clear that the bull run was over. And then in 2022, you see Saturn comes back for the square again. And then when it comes back, this is when we're starting to see the difficult aspects of the square, right? The square, as I said, is a challenging growth. It can be pernicious and destructive, or it can be actually dynamic and progressing you forward, propelling you forward, both at the same time sometimes, right? And in 22, when the square comes back, we're seeing the difficult aspects exactly under the square. So we had the Terra Luna collapse here, right? Under the first time the square comes in. And then when we have the second time, when the square is exact towards the end of the year, October, November, this is when we have the FTX collapse, right? The FTX collapse and the Sam Bankman-Fried or fraud, as he's called now, story, saga, it plays out under the exact Uranus-Saturn square as it hits for a last time in 22, where we're seeing the more challenging aspect of the confrontation between innovation in money, which is Uranus in Taurus, and the establishment, which is Saturn. All right, my friends, since you come so far, we can now get into a more contemporaneous analysis and look at what's happening right now in the current bull market that we're in right now. But before we do that, I want to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, and like this video. It helps with the algorithm. It helps me to grow this new channel. And there's going to be much more on this channel. We look at everything from the emerging risk profile of World War III to the markets, financial markets, and to spiritual and cultural observations that allow you to keep yourself safe and blessed and on the right track. The astrology is the best tool for that. So make sure to subscribe and like the video. And now let's look at the current cycle that we're in right now, the bull market of 2024, which we should be better able to understand now with the patterns that we have looked at. So moving on, we see that in 2023, there is hardly anything, like there's no aspects coming to Uranus apart from this very wide trine, which is not really an aspect at all. So there's really nothing that hits Uranus for all of 23. And, correspondingly, we had a pretty slow 2023, not much happened. And then 2024, this is obviously when all hell breaks loose, because we have here some major things brewing. We have, first of all, obviously, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, right? Massive, massive thing. The conjunction, remember the first time when we had the conjunction, this was the first big expansion of the Bitcoin market. And now this conjunction is happening in Taurus, right? So everybody who knows a little bit of astrology, a little bit of archetypal cosmology would have been able to tell you that March, April is going to be extremely good for Bitcoin. And we broke new all-time highs long before anybody expected it, before the Bitcoin halving actually, which just took place at the end of April. Before that, we already had the new all-time high. And now what happens from here? Where are we going next? First of all, just still to this moment itself, right? So Jupiter-Uranus, it's an important expansion of technological capabilities, specifically around Taurus-related things. So around money and resources and nature and finances, all of these things. So the emergence of RWA, real-world assets, is, in my mind, very clearly falling under this, and it's going to prove an extremely important innovation. The ability to actually tokenize real-world assets is going to be huge. We can't even see how big yet, but the fact that it starts under this Jupiter-Uranus is very, very auspicious. The AI coins that have been big as well, the AI narrative has been really big, obviously also falls under Jupiter-Uranus exact conjunction. And moving on from here, Jupiter moves out of aspect, you see, by May. By May, runs out of aspect. Come June, this phase of euphoria and optimism should be over, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, because then we're running right into this new constellation here, which is this triangle that you can see here, right, between Uranus and Pluto and Neptune. And this is very new. We haven't had this before in the history of Bitcoin or crypto, that we have a constellation together with Neptune as well and Pluto. So this is very major, very important. This triangle, it stands for actually the adoption and smooth implementation of new worldviews, right? This is a long-term thing. It's going to be in the next couple of years, against the backdrop of the craziness, of the madness, the world war, that we're going into, and the Great Reset and everything. We also have a big push forward for new technological worldviews. Now, this is not necessarily always going to be positive, especially given that Uranus here, it stands on the star Algol, right? Which is a malicious star in astrology. So these new technologies, they're not only going to be used for good purposes. In fact, it's actually likely that a lot of new technologies are going to be introduced which can be used against the people, against the drive of people to be more free and more aware. So in this space specifically, in crypto, I think we have to get ready for CBDCs to be introduced massively in 2024, later this year, which are going to go counter and against the main current and purpose of the crypto revolution. But that being said, this can still be seen as a marker for pretty big adoption. So apart from kind of malicious market manipulation and, more stringent measures that the authorities will take in order to push their CBDCs through and hold cryptos down, the picture looks pretty good for the rest of the year. This is going to be a danger, though. Make no mistake. It's going to be a danger for the rest of the year, with Uranus being here on the star Algol. It's not shown here, but it's here on 26 of Taurus, right? This is going to be a very malicious influence that comes into the crypto space for the second part of the year. So, you have to think that there's going to be a lot of forces that will try to push down and hold down the crypto market. But all the while, there will be a lot of technological innovation, a lot of worldview, adaptation, people understanding finally how these new technologies can improve things, a lot of innovations as well in this space with this triangle that we can see. And then we're going to go on into the remainder of the year where the triangle remains, and then only in the next year, in 25, we're finally going to have again an aspect of Saturn to Uranus. And this is a sextile, so an easy aspect, okay? So remember, we said that Saturn, Uranus, this is the most important constellation that we want to see. Every time I showed you here in this video, every time we had Saturn, Uranus constellations, some important things happen in the crypto space, right? And this is a sextile, so it stands for an easy and smooth adaptation. And this means that a lot of money is going to flow into the crypto space in 2025, right? In March 2025, and then going on into 25, April, right? April, May. So April, May, March is really, really good for a lot of money flowing into the space, which means that this is a potential time when we could look at a market top, right, for the current bull run. This is a very promising time for the market top. Or if we think that the top will happen with some delay, because this constellation here, it's actually in place until August. You see, September, August here, it's in place as well. And in August, Uranus is actually going on the star Alcyone, which is a very positive star. It gives fame and great reach to everything. And Uranus being there is very good for the crypto market. And you still have this beautiful constellation here, right? This time Saturn is in here too. And this is very unique and beautiful. And this is in August 2025. So this should be a real peak and a prime time for the crypto space. So this would be a second candidate for a market top for the current bull run, right? So this stays in aspect for a while. You see here, August, September, it's in perfect aspect, right? It's really, really nice, but Saturn kind of leaves a little bit. And then, we have the constellation breaking up. Saturn comes out and it breaks up. In 26, it's completely out, right? Saturn is not in aspect anymore, but we're still getting a couple of nice aspects here from Jupiter, as well as the continuing constellation of Pluto and Neptune as well, which goes on for quite a while. All right, folks, so I had a lot of other observations to share with you still, particularly with regards to the Bitcoin chart, where I discovered some very unique patterns that point to phases that correlate with peaks in the market price, right? But those I'm going to show you in another video in future. I already did a lot on this video. Let's just keep this and digest this. Let me recap this. So what I found here and what I shared with you is that in the development of the crypto market, activations of Uranus in the mundane sky, they always pretty much every time correspond with important developments in the crypto space. And the signature of those aspects, whether it's a Jupiter hit or a Saturn hit, it shows you with great precision what the type of event is going to be. And using this as an interpretive key, I have also shown you in this video that the current bull market, even though for the remainder of the year, we should see some pushback from forces that are trying to keep crypto down, with Uranus being on that star Algol for the second part of the year. When we go into 25, specifically in the spring of 25, we have a very beautiful constellation that points to massive inflows of new money into the space. And then that beautiful constellation gets even more beautiful towards August, September of 25. And either one of those two I would look at for a cycle top for the current cycle that we are in right now. Okay, so this being said, I'm looking forward to exploring much more around all of this with you. If you want to look at specific coins in the altcoin space, then let me know in the comments below if you have some favorites, some favorite narratives. We can look at narratives. Astrology is extremely strong at identifying which narratives correspond with the zeitgeist, the quality of the time. Let me know in the comments below which ones you'd like to know more about. And again, the reminder, if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to this channel and like it and comment, because that helps with the algorithm. This is a new channel. We're just getting this started. And so with your input in the comments, we're going to make it even better together. I look forward to having the convo with you. And until the next time, all the best. Be blessed.